Hello and welcome to Human Systems Engineering 542. This is Module 4, Part 4, where we continue our discussion about controls. And we talked before in the last video about the control systems of knobs and buttons and physical manipulation of those items. What we're going to talk about today is this concept of continuous control and how we consider that in our design. And what we're probably getting more familiar with in our lives is remote manipulation and what to consider in those designs. And so really, what is continuous control? What are we talking about here? Well, continuous control is really the control of a position or of some type of point in time and space of that entity. And so control theory is a theory that helps us understand how people point, position, and track these items. And they have two different kind of examples here for what these are to ground it and make it a little bit more clear here. So a fixed target would be something like moving a cursor on a screen, moving the mouse to also move the cursor on the screen, or a joystick, or even a thumb pad. And those are where you're moving that instrumentation to a fixed point in time and space. But if you have a continuously moving target, this would be something like trying to swat a fly. So you're moving and it's moving simultaneously. Similarly, that would be like driving a car, or as your book describes, riding a bike around a curve. So you have the input of your body in space and time, as well as what's happening around you. And this can also happen in an aircraft as a pilot, or even someone in a rocket ship. So what is tracking? What do we need to do here? Well, humans need to have a relationship between the control output, which is also in your book considered the user input, and what that is doing to the system. So it really describes it nicely in your book as a loop, and you can have a closed loop control system, which is a negative feedback system, which is where you're inputting information. Let's say driving a car, you're inputting that information about the environment. So you're adjusting your speed and the steering wheel, and as error comes to you, maybe you see headlights ahead, or the road gets rough, that is coming into the loop as an error. And that error requires a correction of some sort. So let's think of the error as you're swerving, you see a pothole and you need to swerve. So the error was the pothole, now you're swerving. So as you're swerving, you are correcting for that error. And as you change the angle of the steering wheel, or you apply pressure to the brake, that feedback, the input that you're giving, the user input, is dependent on what you gave it and what you're going to get back. So if you kind of overcorrect, which we'll talk about here in a minute, if you overcorrect, the car is going to adjust a little bit too much, too fast, and you're going to have to then correct it back, the steering wheel. So as you're kind of in the system loop, you are adjusting input output on both ends. An open loop control system, this is where you don't have any error in the loop. So as the user, you don't have any feedback that guides your response. And the more expert you are, the better you can use open loop control systems. But the book really does focus on that control, the closed loop control system, more so than the open loop, because the open loop is a little bit more gray as far as what the expert brings to the table and how they use those mental models to assess the error and how they guide their responses correctly. Again, for experts, it's really hard to ask them, even an expert basketball player, how do you hit three-pointers every time? How do you how do you golf with ease, and what is it that you use? Sometimes they can't verbalize those things, and so when they're correcting an error, it's maybe not necessarily in a loop, but it's in them, and they have a good mental model representation there to access that. So behavior depends on interaction. So where we are in the human and the system is interacting when we're tracking, and our behavior is really dependent on these interactions over time. So as we drive more frequently, it becomes easier and our behavior changes, and our tracking and how we are continuously monitoring that will also change with time. The more experience you get, the more likely you are to respond and not respond to certain things. And as your workload gets harder though, so say you were driving in the vehicle and you have screaming children, as your working memory is taxed and your attention is taxed and all of these things, tracking of the car on the road becomes a little bit harder to do. So as we can think of tracking in any situation where we're engaged with the system and interacting with it, the faster we're going, the more stuff we're doing, and the more that happens, the harder tracking becomes. Also, the faster you move in time and space, the path can become a little bit more unpredictable. So the more unpredictable or unreliable that the path becomes can also aid in having a harder time with tracking. There are ways that we can use our control systems to help us to track. And your book kind of groups these into 3 categories, and they have a little bit different nomenclature here. But the first one is position control, which they call as a 0 order. This is kind of your most basic one that we're used to. It's the mouse click, it's the pointer, it's moving that tracker to a direct location. It's not controlling anything else. The second one is velocity control, which they consider a first order. And this is where kind of the harder you press, the more response the system has. Or if you change that steering wheel angle, it's going to have an effect either more or less based on the strength. Or you can think about it when your steering wheel corrects you into the lane, you have to give it more force to get out if you're trying to get out of that. So that's kind of a first order control. The next one has to do with acceleration control, and this is what we describe as second order, where you're trying to guide something in an acceleration additional order. So if you're trying to navigate the spacecraft through time and space and get it to a location as you're physically moving and you're trying to get precision, it's very difficult to control for these acceleration control second order ones. And they're not as common to us necessarily, though your book describes it as rolling a can into a specific place on a sheet of cardboard. So you're trying to like guide it even though you want precision, even though you're kind of lacking the control. So it gets a little bit harder there. But we are familiar with those first order velocity controls like joysticks and the accelerator, right? You push harder, you go faster, and then those mouse clicks and trackers. Something that really makes the job difficult though is time delays, and this can have negative effects on most all of the orders, but a transport lag is the time between when someone inputs their information to when the system responds. And if there is what we call a lag here, and we've probably all experienced that when you're even on the internet or you're gaming or you are your computer is kind of malfunctioning and it's not really responding, or even your phone. Today my phone wasn't responding in messages fast enough, it was kind of glitching out. When that happens, you don't know if your message was received. And if you don't know if the message was received, that can cause frustration. You can't really comprehend what's going on. And it requires your users to have to anticipate the future and what they think it received and what they think is going to happen. If this was the second order one where you're trying to drive this or fly this rocket ship in space, it's going to have a more negative effect on those types of systems and those types of controls. But in any of them, even just a mouse click that's not responding is very frustrating if there's a time delay there. Gains your book talks about is how much output a system provides for a given input. So we kind of touched on it. If you move your steering wheel just a little bit in a sports car, it actually has quite a bit of it causes a large change, so that's a gain. It's actually called a large gain because that little bit of change made a big difference. And so sometimes, depending on our systems and the controls, we have to understand what type of gain we're going to allow the user to have. Because if you are trying to do a micro incision and you have a large gain and this tiny little micro movement causes basically a large cut in the person that you're maybe doing a tele-remote health surgery or something like that, that would cause a huge issue. So it has to be like a really small gain. You have to give it a lot of pressure to cause a change, not something small. So as the systems are each unique, you have to set what type of gain your system is going to rely on. Large gains in general can cause instability in the system. So like I said, you're in that sports car, you move it just a little bit and now you're spinning, right? Your car just did a 180 or a 360 depending on how fast you were going. In general, medium gains are kind of the best, but they each have their own positive and negatives here. Maintaining stability, though, is the overall goal. You want your system to remain stable, and you want your user to feel like it's seamless and to not have to anticipate or predict or guess. So what you do to maintain stability in the system is we want the gain generally lower, again, dependent. Medium is also good, but lowering that gain can help maintain stability, because if you're driving a car and you're all over the place, you know, a little bit here, and the car's going like this, that's not a great experience for a first-time driver. Reducing lags and delays. Another one is that maybe as the user that you train them not to correct every input that comes in. So maybe, you know, they're getting a lot of feedback here and there. Maybe you don't have to always move the steering wheel. Maybe you can just kind of let that one go and kind of smoothly get through that without having to change it so harshly. Also training people to try to anticipate and predict changes, so as they get more familiar with the system, as they get more familiar with the controls, that they're doing their part, and training kind of their minds on how to anticipate and predict that. And maybe go from more of a closed loop system to that open loop, where as they become more expert, they're more able to predict what's going to happen, and maybe they're more able to correct the errors in advance or know where to look for those errors versus having that feedback to rely on immediately. When you give your user feedback, make sure that the feedback that is given is salient, visible, and immediate. So if you are in that closed loop system, or even in an open loop where your user is seeking out where the error might be, make sure that the error is received, that it's in the forefront, that they can see it, that it happens right away, so that they don't have, again, a delay, and they can correct that immediately. The ideal gain for a user here is, again, that low gain. The low gain requires more effort. The high gain can be helpful because it has a larger change, but it could be imprecise. And remember that speed accuracy trade-off. So sometimes, you know, the faster doesn't mean better, but it's faster. And high gain is more for movements that are repetitive and lengthy, where that low gain is when you're using those high precision movements and very small situations. Okay, so we are familiar with using things like the mouse and now touch screens and digital pens. And as we get more comfortable with these types of things, our preferences might change, or how it's displayed to us might change, or the controls might change. But in general, the general research here is that the mouse and the pointer and clicking has high precision, but it tends to be slower. So I think we probably have felt this when we're using our fingers to click on, let's say, an iMessage, and you're trying to edit the text and you want to go back, and your finger doesn't seem as precise to get right between two letters. If you obviously push down on it and then it enlarges it and then you can slide it, that's helpful. But sometimes using a touch screen, it's a fast response because you don't have the delay of your input on the physical mouse to the screen. So it feels, it is faster and you're able to click things and kind of engage a little bit better. But it is a little bit less accurate sometimes when you're trying to really click this one location, this one box, this one letter. The X when you're trying to X out of the ads that are annoying you. So those types of things, these controls that we have for our users, the mouse, the touch screen, the digital pens, these are getting better and better, especially the digital pens and the touch screens. But understand when to use each one, or that each one has a preference for kind of what work they're doing or what the system is that they're trying to use it for. When you're designing for these controls, for the continuous and the remote type of control, we have to consider the environment that the device is also being used. So are they trying to use a touch screen while they're driving their car, and their chair's vibrating and their hand isn't very stable? What is the hand position? If I have to stretch my hand out all day and I don't have any support here, that could be really frustrating as a kind of an ergonomics type of thing as well, where my body is actually aching because I have to use my arm across a certain distance. But iPads and things are closer, so that can feel more like pen and paper. But where is the control being used? Is it a tight workspace? Is it a vertical one or horizontal workspace? What's the lighting like? And we've talked about these in the previous modules. And not only what's the environment, but how are they getting the information? What screens are they using? What types of things are they using? So what your book calls as using the command input, that would be the view of the open road essentially through your windshield. So if you're flying an aircraft and you're looking out as a pilot, you are taking in all that information, that command input through your eyes, alongside your digital displays. And if it was foggy, you wouldn't necessarily be able to rely on that visual information, that command input anymore. So you are going to have to rely on the displays that provide some type of information for you that says, this is actually your altitude, this is these are the controls, and this is the information that we're getting back on your time and space. Both types of displays are very helpful to the user, that they have that command input, they have a view, and then they have instrumentations that also help to guide the error or mistakes that they might make. If the future can't be easily displayed or detected or seen due to fog or some obstruction, or maybe they're just not privy to that, they're running a machine where they can't see anything inside of it, they're just given the feedback like a printer, where you don't necessarily know all the ins and outs of what's happening internally, where you're just given an error report. Those types of displays can be very helpful to the user to have both, one with their own eyes and one on a display that provides that information. Remote manipulation is where the human is not physically present, and these are things that we're going to be having in our future more so, like telerobotics, unmanned aerial vehicles, and virtual reality. This is maybe your metaverse right here. And how are the humans going to control that environment or that world? Because it is separated in time and space. So a few things that we can really help out in the design here would be controlling our time delay as much as possible. So having reliable internet, maybe lowering image quality on certain aspects to get better, higher speeds, to get the connection better, to get the information faster. You might have to compensate or have a trade-off there. Also those predictive displays that can say that use the information and they actually make a prediction because of the delay, so they compensate for that delay. Ensure as good quality imagery as you can, meaning that 3D images can still be misjudged by humans. They can still feel kind of fake. They're getting better, But using 2 cameras, using all the latest technology to try to be as immersive as possible would be the best case scenario for something like telerobotics, where you are actually working on someone, you're a doctor, and they are overseas fighting in a war. The person in the military and the doctor is now performing surgery from 5,000 miles away. Getting them to feel like the patient is physically present is going to rely a lot on very high technology, very high quality technology, where that rendering, again, is as real as possible. And again, we're getting right on the cusp of kind of a breakthrough here on technology is rapidly changing, and it is getting so much better than it was just 10 years ago. So in the next 10 years, this part is going to be really a new area for human systems engineering. Visual feedback is also necessary. So it is important when you're designing for these situations that they are getting a level of visual feedback, because if I were to be performing this surgery on someone 5,000 miles away and I have an image rendered of their body and I'm over here working on really a holograph or hologram, I still need to see what area is mapping to whatever area it is that I'm doing across the world. So other things that we really need to incorporate there are tactile feedback, proprioceptive also, where the pressure, the touch, the feeling, and the resistance. We need to be able to be immersive. And I think in the metaverse, they're really figuring that out with being able to give someone a hug, or being able to, apply pressure in certain areas. That's kind of the cooler stuff that's happening now, is that those elements are being incorporated, making it for a very much more real experience. So in summary, continuous control and remote manipulation are a part of controlling a system, and these were the elements that went into both of those and how they affect the user experience as a whole. And again, it's different than just the physical hard knobs, because that aspect is removed, so it's almost like an extra layer, and especially with them being completely remote, we're controlling something that's out of our physical sensation and awareness, and we're basically recreating it. But by recreating it, we really realize all the elements that do go into it and how to make it a great experience. Thank you.